Well, welcome everyone. I am Jennifer Morgan. I am a curriculum consultant with the ESC of Northeast Ohio. And I'm your host today, and I wanted to introduce you to my co-host today, which is Kelly Stukas. She is also a curriculum consultant, and she will be helping me with the chat box and answering any questions that you may have, and she'll just be helping me along today. So Kelly, with the warm-up chat box question, what were some of the things that our participants are saying in there?
Yes, we have a very active chat box. One of the themes that's coming out, though, the overarching theme, is that sometimes it's hard to get our students to log into our computers. Some people are only having about 1 out of 25 students accessing the platform, and that home support is a barrier. Holly Cahill has shared that she has sent dojo messages, letters, home, and made phone calls and sent out personal messages, and she's still only having 1 student participating. Janet tells us that she's trying to figure out how to stretch students the same way you would in a classroom, not sure how to best have them submit evidence besides submitting a video or typing a response, but knowing what to ask from them so that it's the results in a quality response. We also have some specialist teachers on here that are saying that they're struggling because they're competing with core teachers for that classroom space, and they're finding that their subject areas are taking a back seat.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, those challenges are definitely, you are not alone, for sure. I'm talking to many districts. The first one for sure, the parental support and getting students to log in, that definitely is one that is high up there. And with that one, that's a tough one. So just wanted to go right into today. You are participating in the student engagement through active participation virtual session today. And again, I'm Jennifer Morgan, and Kelly Stukas will be helping. Our outcomes for today, what we would like to do, for you to be able to do, is to describe alternative procedures for eliciting responses from students during a lesson. And our second goal is for you to be able to utilize active participation procedures to engage students in a blended learning or traditional classroom. Because as it stands right now, we aren't sure what our classrooms are going to look like next year. There are some norms which I would highly, highly suggest that is something that, if you haven't already done, that is something that you have for each of your sessions, whether they are virtual and it's live, or it's virtual and it's recorded. You still should have some set of norms. Ours today are that you would need to use the chat to ask questions and share resources. The chat box has been phenomenal for our participants and for us as hosts, because of the conversations that are going back and forth, and they're getting some really good best practices, ideas, things like that they're able to share with each other. If you can't hear for some reason, please put it in the chat box that you can't hear. We have a large group today, and typically we have them, put their hand around, cup their ear, but there's too many for us to see. So if you can't hear, please put it in the chat box. If there's something that you find that you like a lot, there's an applause little icon that you could do. If you understand something or you like it, you could use thumbs up. For now, we are going to utilize the cameras, but again, with a large group like this, we may have to turn the cameras off to kind of save on, the technology starts to get a little wonky sometimes with this many people. And then your mics are going to be muted for this presentation, and at the end of the presentation, if you'd like to stay over and talk about anything that was presented, then please feel free to do so. But again, any questions, send those to the chat box. The first thing I would like for you to do, what we're going to do today is, in that first slide, when you first logged in today, you had a chat box question, and then it said that you would need something to write with and some sort of scrap piece of paper or a little sticky note. On that paper, I'd like for you to number 1 through 5. We are going to do just a little pre-test per se, and because I'd like to see where you stand on these different statements at this point. So if this is agree, disagree, and why. We are not going to get into the why at this point, but just if you agree, you can put an A. If you disagree, you can put a D. So let's start with the first one. When working with opportunities to respond, the following guides should be followed. Request frequent responses, involve all students, be structured, allow adequate thinking time. Do you agree with that or disagree with that? You do not have to tell why at this time. The second statement, excuse me, is when requesting simple responses, expert teachers ask for numerous responses in a minute. Do you agree with that or disagree with that? The third one, when requesting choral responses, the teacher should use the acceptable signal. They need to ask a question, raise his or her hands, give thinking time, lower the hands, and use a variety of verbal cues such as everyone. Do you agree with that or do you disagree with that? And then number 4, when using partners, the teacher should assign partners pairing low-performing students with high-performing students. Do you agree with that or disagree with that? And then the last one, number 5, when requesting partner responses, it is beneficial to give both partners a job. Do you agree or disagree? Okay, so we're just going to put that aside for now, and as we go through this presentation today, we are going to hit all of those. So towards the end, I'd like to see where you stand as far as your answers at the beginning of the session and then at the end of the session. So when we're talking about engaging our students, one of the things that becomes a huge issue is that use of the cell phones in the classroom. And you know, this particular study was done 5 years ago, and it talked to students and to high school teachers. Now this is high school, but I'm sure within these last 5 years, this has probably trickled down into the middle levels and maybe even elementary. But what they're saying is 92% of the students say that they are using their cell phones during class time to text or look at social media, things like that, even though we have rules, you know, against cell phones during teaching unless we're actually using them for part of a lesson. The problem with this, and I think we all know this, is that they are putting themselves at a huge disadvantage because they're actively engaged in something, which is their cell phone. They're just not actively engaged in what the lesson is, what we are doing for that day. And that's what we have to change. So that's what we're going to look at today, because with this remote learning now that we are in remote learning, the students have no choice but to be on their computers and phones. That's a part of what this remote learning is. And we keeping our students on task and excited about this learning, it can drain us to try to figure out what we can do to keep them on task and to keep them engaged. And you know, when we were in college and stuff, those classroom management classes, they just kind of glazed over them. We really learned a lot about our classroom management once we got into our own classrooms and we started figuring things out. But now with this whole new type of learning, whether it's blended learning or the traditional classroom, we have to come up with some more tricks for our tool bag. And so I think we're going to find some good things for you today. So as educators, we need to keep our students engaged and actively participating in a blended learning or traditional classroom. But how can we do that? We are going to do that through what we call active participation. And active participation is how we're going to get our students to frequently respond to us during our lessons. And why do we want them to respond? Remember earlier we said we need to have them respond numerous times, and they're going to do that whether it's written, verbal, whether it's an action, or if it's through technology, they're going to be responding to us. And the reason why we need them to do this is because, number one, it increases their engagement. It keeps them focused on what our goal is for that lesson. Their on-task behavior, they don't know when we're going to call on them, when we're not going to call on them. We need to keep them on task. It increases these active participation procedures, keep them accountable, because if I'm having them write something on a whiteboard, and all of their peers are going to see it, I'm going to see it, they're going to be a little more intentional with what they're going to put down. They're going to think a little bit more about it. These active participation responses, it reduces their inappropriate behaviors because they know what's expected of them. There's no gray lines. We have structured responses that we want them to do, and so there's no like wiggle room. There's no, they can't be over there digging through their backpack and stuff, because we have structured activities for them to do. Definitely the formative assessment is huge for these responses, these active participation responses, because I, as a teacher, am constantly asking, or I'm seeing what they're writing. They're showing me this, and I'm able to monitor and adjust all of what I'm doing and provide more feedback to the students. You know, it doesn't matter what age we are, but we all need to be able to pause, and we need to process what we are learning. When we get big chunks of information thrown at us, it's tough to remember and kind of process all of that. So we need to kind of be empathetic to the fact that we need to make sure that we are stopping and pausing throughout our lessons to let the students think about the concepts, jot down their thoughts, compare with a peer, a partner, and to be able just to ask us questions as we're going along. So we're going to dig into these active participation procedures, and you're going to get some great stuff for your classrooms. So active participation. So how can students respond in a lesson? There are 4 different ways. They can verbally respond, they can write, written responses, action responses, and then the technology responses. The big thing that we want from them when we're doing these is we want everyone to be responding as much as possible with doing these procedures. We don't want to just be calling on individuals who are raising their hand and volunteering. We want everyone to be responding. That's going to give us, keep everyone engaged and keep us moving along. The one thing, I'm going to go back to this slide. The one thing I do want to say, though, that these responses are not mutually exclusive. It's not like if I'm doing a lesson that I am only doing verbal responses today, or I'm only doing action responses. These 4 can be used. You could use 2 together, 3 together, 4 together. I mean, you can use 1, but you will see that the more ways that we can get we can elicit these responses from our students, the better that they are going to learn and understand the material that we are asking them to do. So if we take a look at this, we have all done, I'm sure, a think, pair, share within our classroom. And the first way I want to talk about is if I am in a traditional classroom, the way that we would typically have them do this is we'd have them think on their own, then we'd have them pair up with their partner, and then we'd have them share out. The difference I like about this one is because we're trying to get more of those responses, one of those 4 responses, is when we ask them to think, we are also asking them to record their responses on a piece of paper, on a whiteboard, on a sticky note. And as they are writing, I, as a teacher, I am moving around the classroom and I have my notepad and I am writing down some of the great responses that I'm seeing, and I'm putting that student's name beside it. So I'm moving around, seeing what they are doing independently. Then when they get with their partner, they're going to share their ideas with their partners. And the one difference that I like is that now they are going to record their partner's best idea. So I'm partner 1, I'm going to tell partner 2 what I wrote down. He's going to tell me what he wrote down, and then we're going to write down what we felt were the best ideas from each of us. And again, I'm still circulating around the room, taking names, getting the amazing things that they're writing. The last piece is the share piece. This is where I would go back up to the front of the room and I would write these ideas with the student's name beside the responses, whether I put it underneath an Elmo or I put it up on a whiteboard, some way so that it is projected out that the students could see it, because they love to see their names up there with their ideas. So that is where I would take and I would talk about what the response was, who it was that the response was, and then give more feedback on it. And so this is a great way for us to get some more discussion in on those topics. Now, in the virtual classroom that we're all doing now, the way that we could do think, pair, share would be that we would still have the students think. Now, this could be a recorded lesson. It could be one where you actually are live, but you would have them think about a question, or you want them to respond to something, and they would still do the part about recording their responses. But instead, they would do that either in Flipgrid or a Padlet. And if you haven't used either of those, I would highly suggest that you look those up and use those. The students really respond very well to Flipgrid and Padlet. So then what you would do in the pair section is, after the student has recorded their response either in Padlet or Flipgrid. Now, Flipgrid is a video. They actually videotape themselves giving their response. They would then, when they are in the pair section, they would be able to see their partner, because the teacher has told them who their partner is, and they would be able to then record what they felt their partner's best idea was. They could then on Flipgrid watch their partner and then record what their partner's best idea was. The share part is they can look at everyone's Padlet or everyone's video on Flipgrid. And what a great way to really learn some material is from their peers and to see what they have said or wrote. And so within the classroom, so there you're doing multiple responses, but for one activity. So that's a think, pair, share. And I'm sure many of you have used think, pair, share, but this is just another way to look at it. So with active participation, there are definitely guidelines when we are wanting them to either respond, write, act out on something, because the first guideline is, again, we need to request frequent responses, numerous. As many times as we get them to respond is better because it's engaging them. Remember, we need to involve all the students because we want to get that equity in our classroom. And by doing that, we can't just call on the students that are volunteering or the students that's inattentive. We want some sort of system that we can get everyone to respond in some manner, whether it's to their partner or it's to the class. It needs to be structured. These responses need to be structured. That you can't just say, turn to the person next to you and tell them about what your answer is. You need to assign partners. You need to have sentence starters. You need to have them use hold-ups, and we'll talk about those later on. And then the thinking time. The thinking time is big. We need to allow that thinking time because when you extend that thinking time, and I've been there as a teacher, like sometimes I'm on a roll and I'm just like, okay, let's go. And you call on that student you know is going to have the right answer, and then you just keep on, trucking through your lesson plan. Well, we really need to purposely think about extending that thinking time. When we ask a question, we need to give that thinking time because there are great benefits. And the benefits is there's greater participation by all learners. Okay, again, we want that equity in the classroom. We don't want those students that sit back there and they're like, I'm never going to answer because, the girl in the front row always answers. If we extend the thinking time out, students get longer responses because now they're looking for evidence to support what it is that they are going to respond, and it's very logical. And so we've got that where, because we let them think it through, because not everybody processes the same. At the same speed. Yes, there are some kids who got it like that. I'm not that type. I have to process very slowly and think about it and get it in a logical sequence. Because the thing is we want to make it safe for our students to respond in our classes so that they are engaged and feel safe in our classes. So we want to give them that time to think about things. And then it also increases the number of follow-up questions that are asked by students, because if I didn't respond, I wasn't the one that was picked, I might want to add to what that student said or find out more about it because I had time to think about it. Think time can be increased. The big thing for us as teachers, though, when we sit back and we think and we have to get from A to B and we have 42 minutes, a lot of times we just assume that the students get it. But we have to stop and we have to think like a novice. We know the material. We're probably on period 3 or 4 of teaching this material, but this is the first time the students have seen it or heard it. Sorry. So if we think like them, then we can, that makes us stop and give them more think time. Having students write down their answers on paper or again on a whiteboard, that will slow that process down and get them to have that think time longer. Having students share their answers with their partners before that. This is huge. Like, just turn partner 1, tell partner 2, what is your answer? And then having students indicate when they have an answer. So, you say, hey, put your thumb up if you have an answer, and you look around, you're like, okay, 3 people do, 4, 5, 11. Okay, I think we're ready to move on. That's a quick and easy way to know that your think time is enough. So the first responses that I want to dig deep into is the verbal responses. And the ones that are in bold, the choral, the partners, and the individual, are the ones we're going to talk about because they translate pretty easily into a blended learning classroom or a traditional classroom. The last two, the teams and the discussion, they lend themselves very well, obviously, to a traditional classroom. They are super important too, because it is getting that discourse in that we really need. But for our purposes today, we're just going to talk about these next three. So choral responses, and I know when I first looked at this, I thought, oh no, this is all elementary. Choral, high schoolers, middle schoolers, which I've done all levels, there's no way they're going to do choral responses. But you have to look at it this way. If you make it like it's normal, like this is just how we do it in this class, they will be more accepting of it. If you come in and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm going to make you do this, responding back to me, you know, I know it's kind of juvenile or elementary, they're never going to you know, jump on that bus with you. So just make it normal, a normal part of kind of what you do and what we do in this class, because it is very, very effective. Choral responses you definitely could use when the answers are short and the same. Again, remember, we want as many kids answering as possible. So this is a great way to do it. It's whenever you want them to recall something, or we're going to rehearse the facts that maybe we just learned 10 minutes ago in class. And it's a great way to review facts maybe from the day before. And so if I were standing in a traditional classroom, or even we could potentially be in a blended classroom where you are in your classroom with students, social distancing though, you could do this. And so if I were to ask a question under a choral response, the big thing that you have to be able to do is you ask the question, you have to give them wait time. And it's very important that you have some sort of hand signal so they understand not to just blurt the answer out. So if I were to say, class, is a spider an insect or an arachnid? And I would hold my hands up. And then I would say, everyone, and then they would answer back, arachnid. Now, if I heard some people say insect, then I would want to definitely give some feedback, and we talk about that, because these are things that we have learned either within that lesson today or from yesterday that we're just going back over. I could also say, class, is 23 a prime number? You got to give them thinking time. Everyone, yes. And then if I wanted to stretch that though even more, I could say, why is 23 a prime number? Depending on where you want to go with your review or with your rehearsal of facts, whatever it is, definitely extending those questions is another way to keep your students engaged and participating. If I am in my virtual world, it would look something like, I would still ask the question, and this could be where I am live, or it could be pre-recorded. If you're doing it pre-recorded, you would just have to give them time to write it down, and then what they could do is at the end, if it's pre-recorded, they could take a picture of what they wrote down, and then they could send it to you email or through your Google Doc or something like that. But it would be the same thing. I would ask a question. I would say, you know, is slate a metamorphic rock? And then the kids could, if we're doing a live session, they could hold up a sticky note. They could say yes or no, and then, but you still want to give that wait time. So is slate a metamorphic rock? And I would, you know, do the same type of hold my hands up, and then I would say class, and then they would hold up their yes or no, or they could do their whiteboards again to do that. And then you obviously want to give them feedback on that. And we could go on with what type of rock is formed from shells, sand, and pebbles, and then they could write down, you know, and I'd say, okay, go ahead and write it down. They would write down sedimentary, and then I would say, okay, class, and then they would turn it and they would show it and would say sedimentary. If someone wrote something igneous, something like that, then we know that we need to talk about it a little more. That formative assessment is there for us to make some changes. Okay. Partner responses is the next for verbal responses. And again, this would be for our blended classroom, more for that traditional in front of us type of response that we would, to elicit more responses from our students. And we want to use this for the longer ones. The choral responses is definitely for those short, quick yes, no's, really quick answers that they can give us. The partner responses, definitely longer, used with our higher order questions. It's very important when we do partners that they sit next to each other, and that's going to look a little different. I was thinking about that this morning. If we have students, they're going to have to be 6 feet apart. I think we can still do the partners, but we're just going to have to teach them. When I talk about there's go down about 3, teach students how to work together. Typically when you're next to a partner, you teach them to look at each other. You want to lean in, you want to listen, and you want to whisper. Okay, if I'm 6 feet apart from them, that's going to look a little different, so we'd have to change that, but still we don't want it to be so loud that it's disrupting the other groups. When you have partners, it is very important, no matter what age level, that you assign the partners, and you want to assign a lower performing student with a middle performing student. And then because sometimes when you pair them with a higher performing student, that higher performing student really takes over and doesn't allow that lower performing student to answer or to participate as much as we'd like. You're going to give those partners a number 1 and a number 2, partner 1, partner 2, and on your seating chart, you will list who partner 1 is, who partner 2 is. And the students will know this. And you would change your partnerships occasionally every 3 to 6 weeks. And the partners can do many things. Partners are great. I mean, they're great for responding to a question, a task, or directive. I mean, so I am teaching, and I say, partner 1, tell partner 2 that plywood is a natural resource. And then partner 2, do you agree, disagree, or why? And then go. And then they would talk about that. So partner 2 would agree or disagree that is plywood a natural resource. So they would talk through that. And then I would have them, I would call on somebody to respond after they've had adequate time to talk through that. Another great use for partners is teaching information to a partner. So I would say, tell your partner the steps you went through in creating your animal drawing. So I'm going to tell my partner, oh, first I started with the body, and then I added a couple legs, and so we're getting them to talk, because we want them to talk more within our classrooms. And then I could say something like, using your worked math problem, explain how you solved the problem to your partner. So then I could be going around and I listen to what they are saying. Everyone is actively involved. Everyone is engaged in this activity, and I can go around and I can listen and see if there's any places that I maybe need to reteach or to give more feedback on. Another use of partners is studying with a partner. This might work well with the older students. It's called study, tell, help, and check. So first, both students would study their notes. Oh, we're going to study our notes that we took over the Panama Canal. Then we're going to tell each other, what we wrote down, and then we're going to talk about it, and we're going to help them kind of figure out, well, I had this, you missed that, or add this to your notes, and then we're going to check with what the teacher has. Like, she'll have a checklist of items that you should have on your study sheet, so they can study together. This one, the other uses for partners, I have definitely seen this work, and it kind of takes a little of it off of you. But if you say partner 1, check with partner 2 to make sure they are on page 56. Because if I have to go and I have to say, Allie, you aren't on page 56, but it kind of takes it off me, because I have the partners, they're checking each other. They're checking to make sure that they're on the right pages, that they have the right materials. They're assisting each other during independent work. They're providing that feedback to each other. So partners are a great way to get students to respond. Individual responses. Yes, we can definitely call on individuals within our classrooms. It's a very common practice, but it's one that we need to try to get away from, is calling on volunteers. Why? Because specific students always volunteer. It's always your high performing students, those assertive students, and those students that are definitely proficient in English. And when you have those volunteers and we're calling on them because they're the only ones that are volunteering, then you have those students that are sitting back, those non-volunteers that over time just don't want to participate anymore. They just check out. They know that those students are going to get it. They're going to get the answer, and then you can move on. So they're really not processing then the information that's been given to them. Another thing that we do is oftentimes we call on inattentive students. I know that I definitely did this. Girl was digging in her backpack, and it's right in the middle of my lesson, and I'm asking a question. She's still digging in her backpack, and I called on her. And the disadvantage to doing that is she definitely didn't have the correct answer. So it didn't help the class. It didn't help that richness of our discussion. It didn't add to what we needed, for her to do for us for this lesson. So it just kind of puts you back a couple steps. So we need to try to get away from calling on volunteers and calling on those inattentive students. So let me ask you a question. If I'm going to call on an individual student, should I, one, say their name first? Like, Allie, I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to answer it. Or should I ask the question first and then call on somebody? So think about that. If I'm going to call on an individual student, should I say their name first or ask the question first? What I'd like for you to do is, whatever your answer is, 1 or 2, just put it on the desk in front of you, or your table, 1 or 2. Okay, and at this time, I'd like for you to show me what you chose, 1 or 2. Okay, all right. I see a couple of people. What the answer is you always want to ask the question first before you call on a student. Now, when I first kind of thought about this, I thought, yeah, but then it gives the student time to say, okay, she's really going to ask me, and I need to really, really, really pay attention. But we want everybody to really, really, really pay attention. So we want everybody to feel like they could be the ones being called on. So you want to always ask the question first, so all the students stay engaged and are on task. If you call on the student and then ask the question, then the other students check out and do not pay as close attention. So we don't want that. Another thing we can do with individual responses, calling on individual students, is we could ask the question and then have them discuss it with their partner. And that really helps. I myself was in a PD day where I was a participant, and my partner and I, when it was time to talk about a question, I didn't even know how to answer it. But because I was able to talk with my partner, I felt so much more confident that if I were to be called on, I would be able to answer that question. And that's a good thing, again, because they're learning from their peers, or learning from each other. And Anita Archer, she is a great lady who I have seen many times. She said that she found that when you have students stand when they are going to respond, that it draws the other students to pay attention to that student who is standing. Now, nowadays, I don't know if it's because they hide behind their phones so much and they really don't like to stand or participate as much. One thing she said that you could have them do is they could stand, and then their partner could stand with them, and that made a huge difference for students. That them standing alone, boy, it was just like they did not want to do that. But if their partner could stand with them, and then at the end their partner was asked, is there anything that you would like to add to their response, then that was very, very helpful for those students. Okay, so we need to, when we are calling on students, individual students, we need to have a system. You need to figure out what is that system that you want in your classroom, so that you are getting that equity, so that you have that that equity within your classroom, the equity of involvement. And so teachers have done many things, and I know you've seen some of these things, but getting away from calling on individual students that are volunteering or that are inattentive, we need to do something like this. So you could write names on cards or sticks, pull a stick and call on a student. Now, most teachers, when we pull the stick, we set it aside. We pull another stick, we set it aside. Now the kids are very keen on that, and they get that. They're like, oh, my name is out on the table, it's not going to be pulled. So what happens then is they become less engaged in what we are doing. One thing that you could do is you could have a can within a can, and when you pull the stick, you could put the name on the outside of the can, so it's still in the can. Okay, kids might catch on to this, but at least it's another way that we could do it. And so all the sticks are still in the can, just not, because some teachers want to be able to call on everybody before they have somebody go again. Some other ways that we can set up a system to call on students is you can use an iPad or iPhone. If you get on there and you just look through the App Store and you just type in randomizer, you're going to get so many different things like Teachers Pick, Stick Pick, Pick Me. They're your Class Dojo. You could do something with your Class Dojo that randomly picks students. This is a great way to do that if you are, kind of into that technology and can do that. Another procedure that you could do is with 2 decks of cards. Say you have a class of 30, you would pull 30 cards out of one deck, pull the same 30 cards out of another, and you could tape one set of the cards on each desk, and then each time you pull a card from that deck, that student then would respond. Now, they say that students oftentimes will write all over the cards. So one teacher said that she would tape it to the back of the chair, and the students knew if they were, Queen of Hearts or, a spade or a diamond, whatever. So those are some ways that you could set up a system in your classroom to get that, make sure you have that equity so everybody has the opportunity to respond. It does not matter what grade level that you do this, because a lot of times they say, oh, this only happens in elementary, but it should be across the board. Okay, this is an actual roll of the dice for participation. This is an actual where the teacher strategy that a teacher is using, and he said he's used many other ones, but he's found that this one has been the best for him. And I'd like for you, as you're watching it, to think about all of the ways that he is maximizing the accountability of his students and how he's keeping them engaged. I want you to think about that. And then in the chat box, I would just like for you to, to write down some of the ways that he's maximizing that accountability and engaging and having that equity within the classroom.
What's one thing that you detected? Table 6, seat 5.
I detected that the statue is pretty old.
Statue's pretty old. All right. The focus of mine in the classroom is for my students to engage in what they're learning. And to maximize accountability, I've tried a lot of different strategies, popsicle sticks, writing names on playing cards. But the strategy I use in my class is rolling 2 die. Table 2, seat 5.
if you look closely, there's like a crescent moon.
You thought that there was a crescent moon here. I have my classroom arranged in 6 tables of 6 students. In each table, each chair has a number, seat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the students know what table they're at and what seat number they're in because they have to put that information on every assignment they turn in, so it's constantly reinforced. When I need to call on a student, I can do it randomly by rolling the die. Table 1, seat 3. The students know that at any time their number could be called. This helps them remain ready, accountable, engaged in what we're doing. I finally managed to engage a certain type of student that I couldn't reach before. Students who tend to be quiet in class, they tend to not raise their hand as much, they tend to not answer many questions. All of a sudden, I'm seeing a completely different side of these students. Table 1, seat 4.
The reason why I can tell Zeus is because of the way his hair is.
The way his hair is, all right. They also understand that if their number comes up 3 times in a row, then they're answering 3 questions in a row, all right? Let's try another. Table 4, seat 4.
One thing we detected is that the chest is shown.
There is no time off from being ready. Table 2, seat 5.
The arm and some of the foot is dissolved.
All right, excellent. I like that idea.
So I'm going to stop right there, and the next slide, I did want you, I know earlier I said you could write in the chat box as you're watching that video, but I would like for you to tell me which system you would use in your classroom to ensure that there is equality in the involvement of all students in your blended or traditional classroom. Remember, we talked about sticks, the apps that you can get on your devices. Is it the cards? Is it the dice? And you just, one word in the chat box would be great. I'm going to move on to written responses, the written response procedures. We are going to talk about short written responses, and Anita Archer again said short writing often. We need to do this, and not just long writing seldom. We need to make responses short, and we need, because not everybody writes as quick as each other and processes as quickly. So that's why they need to be short, and we can make the responses eternal, which means I would say, write down as many ideas as you can until I say stop. Then that way everybody is participating and going. The different types of writing responses that you could do would be, answers. I ask a question, they write it down, sentence starters. For instance, there are several major differences between blank and blank. So these are short written responses that you could do within your classrooms, whether it's blended or traditional, to get students to respond more. Written responses are whiteboards. This is great for virtual classroom and our traditional classrooms. And they can be created on many different things. I found that the sheet protector is one that would be very good in a classroom because you could also put handwriting pages in here, graph paper in here, and students could work out the problem or write down the response and then hold it up to the camera to see if it's right. Again, you must give adequate thinking time and give them feedback on this. And the whiteboards, are just as good as writing it on a piece of paper, but the whiteboards are definitely better to use if you can. Response cards. These are the ones that you need to laminate, you need to have the kids do as often as possible. The response cards, you could have in your classrooms on a 3-ring binder. You have A, B, C, and D, so that when you are up in front of the class and you are giving them questions, whether it's review, whether it's retrieval, whatever it is, the students, you would give them think time, but then they would hold up what the answer is when you tell them to hold up. These are called our hold ups. And it keeps them engaged. It keeps them actively participating because they are responsible. Everyone is responsible. If everyone's not holding something up, then we need to go back through the norms again with our students. The response comes, I wanted to, if you see the LED, if you were studying, the branches of government, and I were to say, the president is in which branch of government? And then the president is which branch of government? So I can do this virtually. And then I would say, okay, hold up your response. And everyone should be holding up the E, okay, for executive. And then we could talk about that. Okay, what about the vice president? What branch of government is he in? So give them wait time. And then the students would hold up. And you could say, oh, I saw that you held up executive and legislative. Brad, tell us why both? Why legislative? And then you can call on students. Remember, not volunteers, but randomly. You randomly want to call on them. So the holdups are fantastic for in your class. This is just some more examples of response holdups using the branches of government. The response sheets are something that you could do very easily in your remote virtual classrooms, and you would just have the students create their paper, and you could have them do this for in the classroom too. The one that is beside it, my colleagues created one that was digital, and or you could just have the students make their own. So when we were doing that agree, disagree, and why, whenever it was time to hold up their answer, they could be pointing to what it is that they what their response is. If it's true and false, we could do, true, they would show us true or false. A, B, C, D, they wouldn't actually need these cards. Everything is right here in this nice, neat little paper. So you could use that over and over again if you put it on cardstock and, excuse me, cardstock and laminated it. We already talked about the agree, disagree, and why. This is a great, and they can also do sticky notes, something very easy that they could do. And if you're doing it virtually like we are, we could say, okay, do you agree or disagree? Okay, they hold it up, they agree. And then in the chat feature, they could say why. Okay, I could say now in the chat feature, I'd like for you to tell me why you agreed with this or why you disagreed with this. So then the teacher has a record of the students that, answered and that they were engaged, and all students are engaged all at the same time. We've got the equity piece in there. And then I, as a teacher, could pull one of those great responses out as an exemplar and use that. This was the agree, disagree, why that we did earlier. Right now, for the sake of time, I wanted to just tell you that all of them are agree except for number 4. When using partners, the teacher should assign partners pairing low-performing students with high-performing students. We wanted low with middle. Okay, so everything else is would be agree. So I hope that you were close. If not, I hope that after this presentation you can see why it is what it is. The last written response that students could do is something called a brain drain, and this is something that could be done during a lesson. So we stop after 10 minutes of me lecturing to them, and I say, okay, I want you to write down everything you can about the Panama Canal that we just learned. Okay, or if I'm teaching a health class and I'm going over a specific field of study like nursing, I could say, okay, I want you to write down everything that you can remember about nursing and what it takes to be a nurse. Go. And then I would model that to them. I would write down so that I'm making sure that I'm giving them enough wait time and that I'm giving them, enough time to get their thoughts down. You could do this, like I said, throughout a lesson, or the next day you come back. I would do it all through a unit. Just keep adding to those brain drains after you keep teaching small little chunks to your students. That will keep them engaged, that will keep them responding. This 3 threes in a row, this is an activity that you could do to help with a retrieval. I am not going to go through that, but it's a great way to get the peers to interact with each other, and it's a way to review. And the direct everything, I just kind of want to get to something else, because this accountability piece is kind of big for me, because I hear this a lot from teachers. So, and I kind of touched on this before. For this particular lesson, they were reading a short excerpt on the Panama Canal. And the teacher, before they started, this is a virtual lesson, and it was recorded. The teacher had them make sure they had a sheet of notebook paper, and she described for them how they should set it up. They, draw a T line down. One side's going to be topic, one side's details, and at the top put Panama Canal. She pauses, she gives them time, even though it's pre-recorded. So she's doing the same thing, so she knows exactly how much time it might take a student. Now, if it's pre-recorded, the students have learned that they can stop, go back if they need to, go forward if they need to. If this is a live session too, you could do the same thing. So as they are reading this excerpt from the Panama Canal, the teacher gives them the topics that are down the left-hand side. She gave them the topics that they were going to take notes on or details on. And so they read through the little summary of the Panama Canal. The teacher then gave them the topics along the left, and then she said that what she wanted them to do was then provide the details on the right-hand side. When they were finished with that, they had a deadline that they needed to take a picture of their details that they wrote down, that paper, and then they had to either email it to her or send it to her in the Google Doc that she had set up for that particular class. That way, it held them accountable for doing that last step. They had to come up with the details themselves from what the lesson was that they learned that day. Another way to hold for accountability is if I am an elementary teacher and I am doing a dictation lesson, and it's pre-recorded, it's a lot of the same thing. So I would say the word, then I would say the sound or the syllables of the word, and then I would say sound and write the letters of the words or the syllables. And the thing is, and you always give them breaks in between each of the directions that I'm giving. The biggest thing is they're writing this on a piece of paper, and if they get it wrong, they just strike it through and then they write it out correctly. Then again, they would take a picture of it and send it to the teacher. Now the little ones, yes, this goes back on to the parents, but then that gets us into some of that accountability piece and gives us some checkpoints for us as teachers. The last thing is action response procedures that helps us engage our students. And the two that we're going to talk about are gestures and hand signals. The gestures is great with vocabulary, for teaching vocabulary. So if we were talking about mammals, more specifically hippopotamus, and we talked about how a hippopotamus, when it gets, during the day, it gets very hot and they need water, so they have to submerge into the water. And then when it gets cooler out, then they emerge. So the gestures that we make up, submerge, emerge, submerge, emerge, are great ways for students to remember those vocabulary words. Another example is in an 8th grade ELA class is narrative writing, and how it's so different than the descriptive writing or the the other writings that we are asking them to do. We need to add paragraphs. We want to teach them how to add paragraphs. So again, coming up with gestures to help them. So for instance, if there's a change in the speaker, then we were going to add a paragraph. If there is a setting, a change in the setting, then we need to add a paragraph. If there's a change in the situation, we're going to add a paragraph. If there's a change in the time, pretend I have a watch on time, then we are going to add a paragraph. So change in the speaker, change in the setting, change in the situation, change in the time. Again, you want the students to believe in this, and this is good, not embarrassing and things like that. But if you do this, change in speaker, change in setting, change in situation, change in time, they're going to remember that, pick that up, come back the next day. Let's do the same gesture motions. An action response procedure to make sure that your students, are getting the information very easy is a fist of 5. Students are displaying their fingers based on their levels of understanding. 1, I don't have any understanding of it. 5, I have a clear understanding of it. Some teachers will do the thumbs up, thumb down, the sideways for kind of got it. But fist of 5 would definitely give the teacher even more information, because you have a few more fingers in between the 1 and the 5 that would show what level they are at. The hand signals, we did this earlier. Students indicate answers by holding up fingers to match numbered answers. The thing that you need to do, though, is you want them to think about it first and process it. Like I said, put your response on your table in front of you if it's a 1 or a 2, because then you want everyone at the same time to hold up their responses. So you say, okay, everyone, and then they hold up what it is that they are responding to. And you can do this in so many different ways, but again, it's actively engaging them and keeping them participating, and that's what you want them to do. Just look through your lessons. Okay, where can I stop and say, okay, is this 1 or a 2? And with your partner, talk about, is a 1 or a 2? And so this is a great way to get them to respond. I did have a poll here. I am going to skip it, because I wanted to go into the technology real quick. The technology is where we're living at right now. These are just different ways, different places that you could go to get the students to be involved in your lessons that are virtual. Poll everywhere. The poll that I was going to have you do was through Zoom, and I have that accessibility because I have the paid version, but so not all do. But that poll everywhere, if you haven't went to their website yet, it has so much great stuff that would keep your students involved during your lessons, and lots of different things. It's great. Then you have our Zoom polls that I talked about, Kahoot. I know a lot of you use that in your traditional classrooms. Then the Padlet, and then obviously the Google Forms. More ways to get them to be responding would be a Flipgrid, the polls, a note catcher, Padlet, and these are also ways that you can check for understanding. It's not just ways to keep them engaged or are participating, but it's also a way to keep them for you to engage, to understand their understanding. And then the last thing is more quick progress checks, checking my progress, things like that. But those are things, if you just Google them, you will be able to find out even more information about how to keep them during a virtual lesson. You want to add that in there. We had music at the beginning. That as they're signing on, that music at the beginning is great. In Poll Everywhere, you could ask them, like, what is your favorite food? And the kids could use emojis that come up, and then you have all these different food emojis that show up in a cool little chart. or you could do it in lessons. You know, what did you learn from the character in the story, To Kill a Mockingbird? And then they, you know, in one word, they would say, you know, and then you have this word wall type thing. It's great. So, okay, so I wanted to wrap things up a little bit, and I hope that you were able to get some great things for your toolbox for whether it's blended learning or a traditional classroom, because we still don't know. But what I'd love for you to do is, in the chat box, I'd like for you to say what 2 active participation procedures you would use during the first semester of school, either in your blended learning or your traditional classroom. Are you going to try to use response cards, which, you know, those were the ones that I had held up, or it could be our sticky notes. Do you want to try to incorporate hand signals more? You know, is it, you know, did you choose 1? Did you choose 2? Fist of 5? Do you want to include more chat boxes and polls, which would be through your Zoom sessions? Do you want to incorporate the partner responses more to get them to be actively involved and feel safe responding? Do you want to get a system for calling on students? Remember, you're going to get an app. Are you going to use sticks? Are you going to use cards, dice? You have to have some system to get that equity. We can't be, you know, just okay with calling on the same students who are volunteering. And then the last one is choral responses. And I put whiteboards with that because depending on whether you're in a traditional classroom or you're in a blended classroom, that could look differently. So I'd love for you to just choose 2 for that first semester. You could always add on, take away. Next semester, add 2 more in, but you don't want to do too much. So while you're doing that, I wanted to share with you this last slide. The ESC of Northeast Ohio is offering many, many digital learning services this summer. And in this little, I think it's 12-page little packet here, you can read about all of the things that are coming up, you know, that my colleagues, my curriculum consultants that I work with are providing other consultants within the ESC. You can click on the link there and it'll take you right to this booklet, and you can read up about it and how to sign up for it. And if you need to connect with any of us, Kelly and I were on today, but Michael and Chris Pelfrey are also consultants with us that would, if you need any of us, please reach out to any of us and we'd be glad to help you. So if you have any questions that you would like to stick around and answer, or, you know, and talk through with Kelly and I'll have Kelly stay on. You're more than welcome to stay. If not, please remember I will be emailing out to you this presentation along with a survey. And so you will have access to this for some of those things that maybe you want to dig a little deeper into. And Kelly, was there anything in the chat that?
Nope, a lot of thank yous.
Awesome. Okay. So thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you at some of our upcoming sessions, our virtual sessions, and have a great, not so sunny yet day.